given the records, and we now wait for other parties that have also had the so-called cadre deployment experience and processes to also now reveal the records of their own executive or federal committees or whatever committees. Because what we have always said is that the African National Congress deploys people on the basis of ability to do the work, and there is nothing sinister about deploying people to do work that needs to be done.
As South Africa braces for a new election, the question of cadre deployment has risen to the surface of the public debate. On the one hand, the Constitutional Court has suggested that, and indeed ruled, that the ANC should release publicly records of its deployment committee. On the other hand, the High Court has ruled that cadre deployment is fundamentally constitutional. Good evening, welcome to Unfiltered, welcome to this debate. I'm Sizwe Mpofu Walsh. This evening, to help us unpack this charged issue, we have, representing the African National Congress NEC member Thembi Nkadimeng. We're also joined by the DA's national spokesperson Solly Malatsi, as well as, for a constitutional perspective, CASAC's Lawson Naidu. Thank you very much for joining us all this evening as the audience. Ms. Nkadimeng, could I begin with you? And, you know, the recently released documents paint a picture of something that seems to go far beyond just the normal political appointment process, but a deeply involved process on behalf of the ANC in many different kinds of appointments. Do you think that what we have seen from these releases indicts the ANC?
No, not at all. I mean, I think firstly, well, good evening. Good evening.
Thank you. Welcome back.
Viewers as well. Thank you. I did make a promise that anytime I'll be here. Look, this is a democratic country, constitutional foundation. You go to the polls, you win the elections on the basis of a political and a policy mandate. A mandate which you are given because of the policies and the issues you want to drive. We are very clear on our aspirations of the National Democratic Revolution. In fact, all this, we view it as a show to set back the transformation agenda which we have set ourselves as the ANC to achieve. Anywhere else in the world, a party that wins deploys its best to go and get the policies implemented on behalf of the promise that it has made to its people. So it can be to a certain level. If you say it's abnormal, it's not normal, it's as if there's a ANC government that leads in a particular space and it doesn't lead in a particular. We're leading government. We're not leading only in the Western Cape. We're leading now 8 provinces. So it will be a ANC that deploys, and as the president in the clip we have played, we try our best to deploy the best fit for purpose. Yes, there has been shortcomings, and we have gone to redress those shortcomings. So it can be that the ANC's policy are against the Constitution. We have released the reports, but is it the first time? No. If you go back 1998, you will realize that even the very initiation of the cadre deployment policy was openly discussed and adopted by the ANC, not in secret, openly in 1990. And views and inputs were made. And we only talk about deployments as if there are no deployments which have also been assisting to government. The Auditor General, we come here, the last time I was here, we were quoting a report for almost the whole hour. Isn't she a good deployment?
Right, well,
Batohi, isn't she a good deployment? SARS, Kiswita, isn't she a best? Maria Ramos, isn't she?
Are you suggesting that the NPA is
no, I'm
deployed?
just saying,
well,
I'm just saying you look into, and Parliament take this process. He sits in Parliament. It's even worse, I don't. He sits.
Yeah, but you use a majority
and go.
there.
No, why not? What do you use? What do you use in Western Cape?
Don't implicate.
What does he use in Western Cape?
I knew tonight was going to be interesting.
No, but
What does he
can
use?
we bring in Mr. Malatsi?
We are part of your decision.
Let's allow Mr. Malatsi a chance.
Democracy is that.
No.
Democracy
Ms.
means
Nkadimeng,
it can be
please.
undemocratic for you, but you are part of
May
it.
I deploy Mr. Malatsi to answer the question?
It's okay.
And
I will give you
we
a
have
chance.
an open debate this evening.
No,
we have
it's
an
good.
hour. How do you respond? Because the ANC says, look, you know what, cadre deployment is actually natural, it's normal. Nothing that has been revealed in these records really goes against, you know, what you would expect from a political party.
Well, I think the ANC is deliberately trying to under-communicate the severe impact that cadre deployment has had on the performance of, one, the public service and the general state of government performance throughout the country. And I mean, the minister is really cherry-picking by just mentioning like 5 names. And it's also problematic because if you are saying that, suggesting that the head of the NDPP is a deployee of the ANC, then it makes the ANC even more complicit. The fundamental problem here is that the governing party has itself involved in the process of identification of candidates, even making recommendations and making sure that not only are those recommendations, that they become the final outcomes. So it does 2 things. It undermines the natural recruitment process of what government departments must do. Right? Because that process, you can argue it's null and void if there is a foregone conclusion that Ms. Nkadimeng must be the head of, you know, a government department, yet you still advertise that. It cheats qualified South Africans who are not politically aligned to the ANC of something that is fundamental in Section 195 of the Constitution, which is a fair opportunity for consideration to employment. The notion that because of electoral outcomes, somehow then they must have, you know, uncharted mandate to influence and interfere in the process of appointing individuals to the state, again, undermines the fundamental principle that our constitution embraces. There has to be a separation between the state and the party. And cadre deployment bears that line fundamentally. If it was, you know, the glaring light that it is, why has, you know, the organization that Ms. Nkadimeng belongs to, you know, put up such a strong fight to get to the Constitutional Court for these documents not to be released?
Can I ask you on that, what do you think that emerges out of these 1,000+ pages that we didn't know before, that is a revelation, if any?
Yeah, what it reveals in true state is how basically the entire government process of recruitment of talent is a foregone conclusion at Luthuli House or at the regional offices of the ANC across the provincial headquarters. That unless you are seen to be a sympathizer or alliance with the ANC, you can never have a fair chance for consideration for employment either in a government state entity or even on the boards, which are supposed to be neutral. And this has a direct correlation with what we have seen in the dire performance of some of these state institutions, where they've not been as transparent, as efficient, and as accountable as they should be.
Let me bring in you, Mr. Naidu. Thanks so much for joining us. Help us make sense from the constitutional perspective. First, what these recent leaks reveal and whether, in your view, they show a party that's going beyond its mandate as the governing party, or whether this is actually something that is quite normal to expect from a governing party anywhere in the world.
Thank you, Sizwe. Look, I think to start off with, I think it's quite clear that this is a practice that is widespread globally, that when parties win power, they want people in senior positions in the state to be able to implement the policies that they've been elected upon. And, you know, it's quite clear that, as I say, it's widespread and there's nothing necessarily untoward about that. But I think there needs to be a fundamental distinction made between a policy of cadre deployment in the case of the African National Congress and the actual practice that emerges out of that policy, and whether that practice is actually in line with the policy. And if one looks at the policy from the various national conferences of the ANC over the years, it's set out in very clear terms that it is about attracting people of the requisite ability who happen to share the ideals of the ANC. But when we look through some of the records that have recently been released, you see the level of detail into which the ANC Deployment Committee has gone. In particular, and again, I think an important distinction needs to be made between positions in the public service within government departments, where one could argue that the ruling party has a right to have its views expressed and heard on those issues, and more broadly in relation to state-owned companies, state-owned enterprises. And I think, just a brief perusal of the minutes of those deployment committees shows the sort of extent to which that committee focused largely on SOEs rather than positions in the public service. So I think that distinction is an important one.
Right.
But to say, Sizwe, I don't think there's any smoking gun that's been revealed in the records that the ANC has disclosed.
If there is a smoking gun, Ms. Ngadi, one of the things that Dr. Scriber has suggested is that these records reveal that even before there is a public process, the deployment committee has already made a decision, and so it has put the cart before the horse. Do you accept that criticism? And is the ANC making these decisions and then merely putting public advertisements for these posts out as a formality?
We accept that criticism. Hence, the government is leading a professionalization of the public sector. Competency frameworks have been set. Policies of recruitment requirements have been set. But I also want to delve into an issue that, hey, it's only the ANC where it governs, that it doesn't. I mean, there are good typical examples of the DA.
Let's deal with
in Western Cape,
where?
Stellenbosch municipality. You actually find in court 750,000. A colored lady, honors, Melissa Nell, a matriculant, who was working in the office of the mayor, first deployed in the office of the mayor, then into administration without a qualification.
Who was the mayor?
Well, I don't know the mayor who it was,
Well,
but I'm just saying,
facts, Minister.
no, I'm giving you facts. I'm even calling a name. I can't come here and say Melissa Nell and call it that. She can take me to court. I'm saying Melissa Nell. You can Google it. Stellenbosch municipality, 750,000 was what the municipality paid to settle that. Let's come to City of Tshwane. Marietta Ocamp, deployed firstly to the office of Solim Sima, and then secondly moved to be the executive director in Solim Sima.
So
a matriculant.
There's a fundamental conflation here.
No, requirements are
I'm going to give you a chance to respond,
No. Requirements there in those two positions, RVQ 13, both matriculants. In fact, with Marietta, it was even worse. There was forgery. In her application, by her own hand, she wrote that she has a BTEC. She doesn't have. It's a record. If you want to release them, as you have been challenged by the president, release them, you will see. She was paid 1.7 million in a month.
There for now, Mr. Malatsi.
Per annum.
We're about to go for
What
break.
is that?
Let me respond
No,
to
don't worry. As soon as we come back,
more, by the way,
you'll be
it's okay,
allowed.
but I'll stop there.
And
I'll stop there.
we have all the time in the world, so tonight is going to be fun.
Can you imagine?
I'm
serious.
Maybe I should consult.
A bodybuilder.
You can do better.
Let's go to a break. This evening, we are discussing and debating the hot issue of cadre deployment. Is it, as the DA alleges, a contravention of the noble art of an independent civil service, or is it just a normal practice that all governments in the world engage in? We'll be back after the break to explore it further. Stick with us.
I hosted a press conference on Friday, and I set out very clearly what cadre deployment is and what cadre deployment is not. And I set out very, very clearly as well, the DA does not practice cadre deployment. We do not have a cadre deployment committee. We do not have a cadre deployment WhatsApp, and that municipalities are free to choose who they want to be in those particular positions.
Welcome back to Unfiltered. We are debating cadre deployment this evening, which has been top of mind in the South African political debate. Mr. Malatsi of the DA, before we went to break, I promised you an opportunity to respond to the charge of hypocrisy on the part of the DA, because the ANC has said that you're practicing cadre deployment in just the same way.
I mean, that is the lamest deflection that the ANC could pull. But I think before we get into that, the minister made some very interesting observations earlier, which I think we must correct, because there is a fundamental difference between political appointments, which happens in the private offices of political office bearers, and administrative positions, which are about, individuals that are running the administration. She herself knows as a political office bearer that the appointment of individuals there, the process is completely different, right? And there is no debate whatsoever about getting, people who align with your political vision and your political mandate to help you run your individual private office in the fulfillment of the mandate that you are elected into. The fundamental issue here is, one, should a political party be doing short lists of candidates and going further to recommending who should be appointed in a process that is, one, supposed to be fair, transparent, and open to every individual who qualifies for that position. And I'm glad you mentioned Tshwane, because you know very well, Minister, because you were one of the champions, in fact, you still are, of advocating that political office bearers, right, should not be appointed in the administrations. When Solly Msimang got to Tshwane, in the office of the mayor, we found over 36 officials appointed as community license officers, and the common factor amongst those, either branch chairpersons or branch secretaries of the ANC, who were appointed in the state to do party organizational work at the expense of the taxpayers of Tshwane. Today in Parliament, I'm very glad, Minister, you again raised that issue. Parliament adopted the Public Service Amendment Bill, which in effect aims to, one, professionalize the public service, and adopted a very key concept, which, and I'm glad you were also doing DA lexicon, like fit for purpose. So you've been reading our stuff and learning from some of it, which is great.
Can I ask you on that, Mr. Malatsi? Okay, so you've made this distinction between private offices and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There have been allegations from people like Bongani Baloyi. When he was mayor of Midvaal, he said that there was a pressure on him to make an appointment within the municipality. There was a suggestion that I think Musi Maimane tried to dispel about the DA actually encouraging a policy of cadre deployment under his leadership. There have been suggestions about institutions like Westgrow in the Western Cape, which are about provincial economic development, which go beyond private offices. So what do you make of those criticisms that seem to go even deeper than merely the private offices of mayors and other political players?
I mean, all those criticisms do not take into consideration the different circumstances leading to each and every case. Let's deal with the Westgrow one, because I think that's the most prominent that people use, that a former DA MP, Tim Harris, ended up being the CEO of Westgrow. He had resigned as a party member, as a member of parliament from the DA. He didn't move from being a member of parliament directly into that position. There was an open recruitment process which was done by the Western Cape government, and I'm getting to that because you know what? Today, Tim Harris, right, is the interim chairperson of South African tourism, right? Is that cadre deployment?
Well,
it is not. Let's deal with Bongani. He mentioned two examples.
Okay, but can I ask you to deal with them relatively quickly, because I need to bring in Mr. Naidu as well, and then we'll bring in.
Yeah, just to be clear, you will find no record, because it doesn't exist, of the DA federal leadership instructing any of our former mayors, any of our current mayors,
so you flatly deny that,
or the premier, that they were instructed to appoint individual X to be a municipal manager or an executive director.
Right.
There's never been that. That's why even when Bongani was on another show, he confessed that he had never been given such an instruction to do so, because we don't. And that is why, in comparison, you realize that the performance is always better where you don't interfere with the process of appointment for administrative positions.
Mr. Naidu, how do you respond to this allegation of hypocrisy, and do you think that there's something different in kind about what the ANC is doing versus what the DA is doing where it has governed?
Well, I think, if the reports are to be believed, and despite Mr. Malatsi's denial of a similar policy operating within the Democratic Alliance, what I said earlier is that this is a common practice across the globe. It's a recognized practice that a political party will want people in positions to implement their policies that are sympathetic and committed to implementing those policies. But what I think is important here is the question of how it's actually implemented. There's a constitutional framework around transformation of our society, and there's a plethora of legislation. The Employment Equity Act, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, the Labour Relations Act, and a whole litany of legislation that directs entities in society, whether in the public sector or indeed in the private sector, to adopt a process of redress of previous discriminatory practices. And, the question that arises, is that not sufficient to be able to achieve the purposes of cadre deployment? Because, this is about, as, the Constitution makes quite clear, in relation to the public service in sections 195 and 197, that this is about redress, but also about ensuring that it is a program of appointing people who will fulfill the objectives and the vision of the Constitution itself. So the question has to be asked as to whether this policy is relevant now as it was undoubtedly was in the early 1990s when the ANC came into power for the first time, and there needed to be a concerted effort at reforming the public sector in particular, and that was clearly a successful attempt by the ANC to transform certainly the high echelons of management within the public service at that time.
It's an interesting point that made there, Ms. Nkadimeng, and can I put that to you? Because why does there need to be an additional criterion of loyalty to the ANC if transformation is already embedded in the Constitution, the Labour Relations Act? Why do we need this extra layer when, in theory, the state should already be transforming itself based on our legislation and our laws?
It's not necessarily an extra layer. It will also be very much incorrect to say every DG who works in government is a member of an ANC. No. Some will even hire them knowing.
But the majority, yeah.
Well, the majority, as they are in the Western Cape.
Where?
They are members of a Democratic Alliance or by Democratic Alliance choice. So if Tim today is a acting chair, it means the process would have said he is the best.
But the process is only based when he's appointed at national government and not at provincial.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Let's allow Ms. Nkadimeng
you had Henry Terreite, who was never a member of the ANC. So it does mean that when we sit and look into the person and the caliber, the experience, you give a person a chance, as it's enshrined in the Constitution. Not everybody who serves in government, it is mostly, yes, at senior positions, but everybody fairly is given a chance. And I want to correct the notion of the city of Tshwane. Let's start with the Melissa Nel. It was a local economic unit of that municipality. LED, not even in politics, matriculant versus honors-bearing colored lady. You will go and Google it and check it.
Deal with the 36.
No, I'm coming into the bodybuilder and I've been a mayor. Yes, you don't interview, but there are requirements. I'm a minister now. The office of a minister must be led at a level of a chief director. That chief director can't be a matriculant. It puts requirements. Yes, you can recruit Sizwe, is aligned to the term of your contract. If I cease to exist today, your job ends, right? You don't have to be interviewed, but you must provide. That is why Ocamp had to forge. There was no reason for her not to write matric openly. She wrote BTEC because she knows the handbook is very instructive on the requirements that you have to meet. So anyway, you are very big in forgery. I mean, there was a matigizela and a mazoni, a degree and something and a matric in between. But it's okay. All I'm saying is that they are in the process of a good police. We all can appreciate that there will be cases where we'll all have to follow up. And I mean, Melissa was getting 1.7 per annum. Didn't even apply for an increase process. a waiver from a minister then. So there's a lot that is wrong. I'm just saying the DA can come here today. We may not be having those records,
right,
but they do deploy.
Mr. Malatsi?
The disadvantage of extrapolation is that you can't go beyond just one example, right? And that's where she's confined in. And I have empathy for that, because you are really, pulling a straw man's argument here. The issue that we are both having here is that we shouldn't be meddling in the administrative positions to the extent that you are doing, and to the scale that you are. This thing just doesn't end with national governments, right? At regional levels, Minister, and we'll get to that, because I'm glad you keep highlighting this other examples, right? You were the mayor of Polokwane. You know very well that you and Samu there in Polokwane had a very big fight, because you were fighting against the pressure of having ANC regional leaders being pushed to executive director positions in the Polokwane municipality. Secondly, we are dealing again with, should it get to the extent, if we are really about attracting the best talent and we are promoting excellence, should a political party be prescriptive in saying this is who we are recommending, for instance, to be the DG or the CEO of a state-owned enterprise, and then pull this entire machinery of the state along in a fruitless exercise of recruitment, of advertising, and also basically playing with people's emotions here, of making them feel that they are part of a legitimate process that is already a foregone conclusion.
He's doing a very good job for me.
That shouldn't be the case. And we can't, Minister, under-communicate the scale that cadre deployment has had on the underperformance in government, because it's very convenient of you to say there's been, factory faults here and there. No, unfortunately, the scale is so widespread. The worst performing municipalities in the province, across the country, right? They are largely ANC municipalities in there.
I'll correct you again.
And the performance there is, the common factor there is that when you look at the appointments at CFOs and the executive directors, how they've been compromised, and even getting to chasing away talent from there. You wouldn't have embarked on this gallant effort, Minister, to make sure that there is interventions, which basically aligns with what we proposed, which was a bill, private member's bill we brought to Parliament about professionalizing the public service, and found goodwill in it. If you were not recognizing that, there's something fundamentally rotten with this.
Thank you. Let's go to a break. We're halfway. We still have more to go, and there'll be more than enough opportunity and for you, Mr. Naidu, on Zoom. So it's a hot topic. It's a massive debate in our politics right now. Cadre deployment. Is it eating away at the state, or just a normal policy that's actually necessary to reinforce transformation and other important imperatives? After the break, we come back and ask, is the ANC in contempt of the Constitutional Court as alleged by the DA? Stick with us.
The order of the court is as follows. 1, the application is dismissed with cost.
Welcome back to Unfiltered. We're discussing cadre deployment and a host of recent court actions which have cast it right back into the spotlight in South African politics. Ms. Nkadimeng, now you won this case about the unconstitutionality of cadre deployment. So we're going to put that on one side for now. But on the other side, with this appeal to the Constitutional Court, which failed, the DA is now actually saying that you are in contempt of the Constitutional Court, and they want to use the same precedent from the not the Nkandla case, but the case relating to Jacob Zuma's ultimate incarceration for contempt against your Secretary General. Are you in contempt of the Constitutional Court? Have you fulfilled all your obligations in disclosing all the records that were required after that appeal was dismissed?
Yes, we have. As far as I know, we have. As far as the NEC brief is, we have. You will recall also the President's testimony. In fact, the case of the Democratic Alliance come after the testimony of the President at the Zondo Commission, where he also articulated what is available and making a commitment to the best of his ability to get all the records and even submit them to the commission. You know, and that is compliance. And today you have got the records out.
Why were names excluded and things redacted from the records?
But, well, there
were some WhatsApp messages
that needs to safeguard my name, my number. You can't get that without my authority, without having undertaken a particular process. We all South Africans are protected. Remember, you are talking about the ANC, but that involves other third, fourth, fifth parties that are not necessarily having an opportunity.
Did you get legal advice to that effect, that you should redact
Well, I may
the names?
not in depth be in the knowledge of that, but we always, as dealing with such a huge cases, get legal advice. And remember, legal advice may not necessarily all the time come to be spot on. The provincial bill is talking about, the advisors are saying this is unconstitutional, they are continuing in the Western Cape. So yeah, there is legal advice, you understand? And we always will abide. And that's the commitment that the president has made. But what is this about in the view of the ANC? This is about the reversal of the transformation agenda by the Democratic Alliance. It doesn't start today with the cadre deployment policy. It started yesterday with the black economic empowerment policy. Do away with it. It's not fit for Africans. Give everybody equal opportunity. Forgetting the inequalities of the past, forgetting the difficulties of spatial development that are still there today, and forgetting historically where do we come from. That's what it is about.
Right.
The agenda that we are pursuing to deal with all the isms and to redress the inequalities. That's what this show. I'm sure there's another episode that is coming. The first one was the BEE, the second one is cadre. But I'm saying there is no way that Bongani can stand up. I served with him at SALGA. He's a man of integrity. I believe him. He can't stand up and say there are records. I was a mayor. He was a mayor almost the same time I was. Musi Maiman, the head. Yeah, well, he comes here now, of course, former, and you say they are not talking the truth. It's very selective. It is very much impractical that in the Western Cape, where the DA governs, even though I may not
it might be foreign to you, but
you do that.
Let me bring
but
in
also, I wanted to correct.
Let me just bring in Mr. Naidu on this, because I want to stick on this question of contempt, and then I will come back to you, Ms. Nkadimeng, after I've heard from Mr. Malatsi, and we still do have some time for this debate. But Mr. Naidu, just on this question of contempt, it's an interesting one, because the Zuma contempt order seemed very rare, and it was about Zuma acting in his personal capacity. Whereas here we have Mbalula acting in an institutional capacity as SG of the ANC. What do you make of this attempt to hold the Secretary General of the ANC, Mr. Mbalula, in contempt, and attempt to impose this carceral punishment on him a la the Zuma contempt order?
Siswa, look, I think firstly, as I said earlier, the records that the ANC have disclosed have not revealed a smoking gun. And we must look at this in the context of the election campaign that we're currently in the midst of. And the DA, quite understandably, are looking at trying to direct issues at President Ramaphosa himself to tarnish his image in the run-up to the election. So I think the issue of keeping this cadre deployment issue alive, keeping alive the issue of whether the ANC has in fact disclosed all of the records that they have, is part of that agenda, and I think we must understand that for what it is. Insofar as whether the Secretary General of the ANC can be held in contempt of court, whether he's acting in a representative capacity as the accounting officer of the ANC, I think there are fundamental differences with the Zuma case, because here it will have to be demonstrated, as Ms. Nkadimeng has said, that the ANC has not or has provided all of the information at its disposal, and it's going to be, I think, very difficult to disprove that they have done that. Can someone prove that additional records exist which the ANC has not made available? to the extent that they've said there's certain information that they simply don't have access to. How is a court going to be able to second guess that? So I think that's a significant differentiator with the Zuma case, where it was a simple, clear-cut issue that he was in contempt of court for not conforming to the a decision of the Constitutional Court that he should appear before the Zondo Commission. This, I think, is a lot more complex, and the sanction of imprisonment isn't the only tool that is available to the Constitutional Court. They may find that even if the ANC had not disclosed all of the information, that a fine may be a more appropriate sanction in this case. So I think we must separate the DA's electioneering from what the real legal situation might be.
Mr. Malatsi, has the ANC complied with the order, and do you have evidence that there's been substantial non-compliance? And then why this contempt move?
Yeah. Before we get to that, I think what we need to acknowledge, which is a fact, is that the DA's case predates even the president's testimony at the Zondo Commission. This case goes back many, many years. So simply because the timing of the ruling coincides with the lead up to the 2024 election is not of our own choice. It's the timeline of the Constitutional Court. So I don't think it is wholly fair to say that it is electioneering, because it is years and years of a legal fight that we're embarked on. Our view with what has been released, given the extent to which it has been heavily redacted, is that it's not all that they should have released. And in addition to that is the fact that there is still a missing period, which we fought so hard to get the Constitutional Court to get the records of. And this aligns with the period of which the current president, in his previous capacity as the deputy president of Ms. Ngadi's organization, was the chair of the deployment committee. And now there's also been a very convenient excuse that the laptop, which previously had archives of this, has disappeared. Right. So what we want direction from the Constitutional Court is, because it was very specific about, one, the extent and the volume of what should be released, in addition to the WhatsApp messages and the emails. We believe that has not been fully complied with, and the best guidance on that matter will come from the Constitutional Court. And Mr. Naidoo makes a very, very good reference to what are the options that are within the ambit of the Constitutional Court in terms, should it find that there is contempt of court, as we believe that there is. And we believe that the Secretary General of the ANC, as the Chief Information Officer, who is responsible for disseminating this information to us, would be the appropriate person to be held accountable to that. But I think it is fair to recognize that this is a long-standing case that has taken years to get to where it is, and that the Constitutional Court ruling is a matter of consequence.
Ms. Ngadi, the DA believes that there's a convenient omission of a key period. Why that omission, and are there good reasons for that omission in the records that you handed over?
Well, the ANC has given its reasons. I mean, we've been governing for over 30 years. We may not have every detail in terms of what we would have set on in the deployment committee. And the Constitutional Court will be the arbiter on this matter. What has been revealed, I mean, if you go to an extent of even revealing WhatsApp messages, really, I think it goes to an extent to show that you are willing to abide by the court ruling, and you give all the records that are within your disposal. And we also need to recollect that SG Mbalula started in 2022, and there have been previous offices. Yes, there will be institutional memory and all that, but a computer that was used in 1996 and in 2006 may not necessarily be available or in good shape today. But the ANC has put, well, yes, that's why the ANC has put the records that it has. But you may also find that even in the archiving of the documents, you don't necessarily archive each and every decision that you would have made. Some are made at other levels of the ANC, which could also be assisting in terms of what you would want to get. But to suggest that we just don't want to give the documents when they are already in the hands of the Democratic Alliance and they've opened. Of course, we are in government, and we still believe that there's nothing wrong about the deployment committee and its functions for as long as it follows the requirements. It look for trained, skilled people. It deploy accordingly people who will be able to deliver and carry the lives of South Africans and make it better. That's our policy, which is open since 1998. It gets to be modified as time changes, but in the open has never been hidden. So we'll never change that we are a political party. We aspire to make the lives of our people better. We take them to the center of their own development. We deploy them where they could be able to to lead themselves and deliver what the policy of the ANC is about. That's who we are.
Let's cut to a break quickly, Ms. Nkadimeng, and when we come back, we will continue this debate and allow our other panelists to respond. It's a firecracker tonight. Cadre deployment, the center of political debate in South Africa and in the run-up to this election. A policy that is appropriate or one that goes far beyond the bounds of what the government should do. Let's continue this conversation after the break. Welcome back to Unfiltered. We're debating cadre deployment this evening with the ANC, the DA, and some legal expertise with some assistance as well. Let's take some of your views on social media and we'll come back to our panel. God Did says, just one question for the panel tonight. How can the system of cadre deployment ensure accountability and transparency in public service appointments, preventing nepotism or favoritism and maintaining public trust? This because we as the citizens are losing our trust in it. Let's have a look at some more of your comments. Sillo says, the cadre deployment is justifiable, but abused by the ruling party. It is theoretically correct, but practically vulnerable to exploitation. And let's take one more comment from Zuvugile, who says, I don't think it is justifiable because it looks like it gives cadres an assurance of a job, while other people who are qualified for the same job are sidelined without getting an opportunity to compete for the job. I think it is discriminating. Mr. Naidu, can we start with you in this segment? And can I just come to this recent decision by the High Court? Because there are two legal processes here. The Constitutional Court dismissed the appeal and made sure the ANC released the records. But then there was this constitutional challenge to the idea of cadre deployment itself. And there, one must say that the court had quite strong words for the DA, calling its case based on, quote, speculation. What do you think this recent case, which dismissed the constitutional attack on cadre deployment, means for this debate?
Well, I think, the point has been made that the policy as it is encapsulated on paper by the ANC, and to its credit, the ANC is quite open about its policy. It's articulated in conference resolutions and various other documents of the African National Congress, that policy is not intrinsically unconstitutional, does not fall foul of the law. Where it might do, as we've discussed, is in terms of its implementation. So I think it was quite clear that the court was quite scathing of the DA's application in this regard, that it was speculative, it was political conjecture. And I think, just to demonstrate how hopeless that case by the DA was, that it could very well have been dismissed by the court on the basis of a lack of standing alone. Yet the court took a generous interpretation to allow it to consider the claims that were made by the DA and then obviously subsequently dismiss that. But I think, as we've said, and as, Sello's comment on the that you just read out says, that the policy itself is fine, but it's the question of its implementation. Does it need to be as centralized as it is by the ANC with the deployment committee? If a governing party has a policy in terms of transformation, the kinds of people it wants to appoint to senior positions, can that not be, delegated to ministers where they play a role in such appointments, or to the relevant structures to follow the legal processes that are set out in legislation regarding the appointment of people to these positions. And I think it's also worth mentioning aspects that arose in the Zondo Commission, where there were specific appointments, in particular to state-owned companies such as Transnet, Eskom, Denel, and the like, where the state capture policy of the ANC was very easily abused in order to parachute particular individuals in who would be doing the bidding of those who benefit from state capture. And I think it's for that reason that Zondo recommended that there should be an independent panel to screen and recommend people for appointment to the boards of state-owned entities. So I think those are some of the issues that we learn out of this process, that the policy itself is not necessarily problematic, but it's how it's interpreted and how it's implemented.
Mr. Malatsi, this will probably be your final word. Let's come to this recent constitutional, the High Court defeat, because where you have certainly won at the Constitutional Court, the court reserved some relatively strong words for your case. They also looked at this connection you tried to draw between Chief Justice Zondo's remarks and cadre deployment and found some problems there. Was this a blow, and have you overplayed your hand in going for the theory of cadre deployment rather than trying to just attack it in practice?
No, I don't think we've overplayed our hand. You know, I think when you also look at the public sentiment, which is the key factor that, you know, ultimately the outcome of the policy is discriminatory towards, you know, individuals who are not seen to be aligned to the governing party. And that in there, you know, we believe that there is a strong ground to make it contestable on a constitutionality basis, particularly when you look further into Section 195, subsection 1 up to 7, right? In terms of the process for talent identification in the public service. But we are a party that respects the rule of law. We said so from the onset when the High Court made the ruling. We believe, though, that despite its ruling, that, you know, we've got the option to pursue you know, an appeal, and that we are currently considering that, because even in that judgment, there is an inference that, you know, the court makes about, you know, the clear line that should exist and be upheld between the party and the state. And we believe that, you know, that inference itself also points out to the problematic nature of this policy and the damage that it has caused to the public, to the performance of the public service, to the state of our municipalities in the country, and also to the abuse that has engulfed many of the state-owned enterprises. And there's a very clear correlation between some of the looting that has happened at disgusting levels in some of the major state-owned enterprises and the cadres who were appointed there coming out of the cadre deployment committee's recommendations.
Ms. Nkadimeng will give you the final word this evening.
Well, thank you very much, Suzo. It has been a very great one, honestly.
That's for sure.
Yeah, no. But one, I think the High Court outcome was very fundamental to our views as the ANC. One, to say there's fundamentally nothing wrong about the policy. We have to tighten on the implementation. We appreciate the gaps and the shortcomings that came through. We're doing something about, we're even going to an extent, even politically, of taking interviews to our deployees, where, for example, Mr. Naidu says at the ministerial level interviews. And I think the understanding then of how the deployment committee of the ANC, possibly even for the community, is not. It does not withdraw the interviewing. The processes all get there. There is an outcome of a deployment committee which also does not get to be exercised, because in fact he ran a case about me in Polokwane where the deployment committee said we offer this, and I said no, it does not. And that's what the ANC says. It says you are responsible ultimately to ensure that the legislation and the requirements are what is set on the book, and you ensure that you live by it. And that's what even the political training is about, to ensure that the deployment politically also align to the professionalization, not only of local government, but of the entire public service as in government. But I think it was a good test, And I still insist that Mr. Naidu is correct. Yes, the outcome could be, but the agenda of the Democratic Alliance is to redress the gains of freedom that has been achieved through blood, sweat, and tears, and we're not going to allow
that.
You are not going to do that, because when you were speaking, I was quiet.
I do apologize, Ms. Nkadimeng and Mr. Malatsi. Maybe we should have 2 hours and invite you back for more. Mr. Naidu as well, thank you so much for your expertise and your views this evening. What a fascinating debate on cadre deployment. Let's continue the conversation on X at Unfiltered SABC. And thank you for joining us for yet another installment of Unfiltered News, Unfiltered Views, and Unfiltered Conversations.